Emma Larson did not cry out when her leg buckled. She went down hard into the red dust of the trail, one hand still gripping her son's wrist so he wouldn't fall with her. Liam screamed. She told him not to. He screamed anyway. That was the moment Jake Hunter stopped his horse. If this story already has your heart, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The boy's voice carried farther than his mother would have liked. Mister, please, my mama can't stand up. Emma pressed her palm into the cracked earth and tried to push herself upright. Her arms shook. The sun sat dead overhead, no mercy in it, burning through the back of her dress like it had a personal grievance against her. She had been walking since before dawn. Her ankle, the one she'd twisted on the loose shale 2 miles back, had swollen inside her boot to the point where she could feel the leather straining against the skin. She hadn't told Liam how bad it was. She should have. Maybe if she had, he wouldn't have started hollering at a stranger on the road. Liam? Her voice came out harder than she intended. Liam, stop that. But, Mama, I said stop. The boy went quiet. He was 7 years old, and he had learned in the past 8 months when not to argue with her. That knowledge in his eyes, the careful, watchful way he measured her moods, broke something in Emma every time she saw it. Children weren't supposed to know how to read grief on a person's face. They were supposed to be ignorant of it, protected from it. She hadn't been able to protect him from much. She tried again to stand. Her ankle screamed at her, and she bit down on the inside of her cheek and ignored it, the way she had ignored the blisters on her heels, and the ache behind her eyes from squinting against the sun, and the hollow feeling in her stomach she hadn't filled since yesterday morning. You could ignore a lot of things when you had a child watching you. Pride was useful that way. It kept you upright even when your body was done. Except her body was done. She sank back into the dust. Ma'am? The voice came from her left, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't feel the need to announce itself twice. Emma turned her head. The man sat on a roan horse about 20 feet away, one hand resting loose on the pommel, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He was big, broad through the shoulders, dark from the sun, a hat pulled low enough that she had to look twice to find his eyes. They were gray, steady, the kind of eyes that had seen enough trouble to stop being surprised by it. He hadn't ridden up fast. He had simply appeared, the way men did out here on the open trail, as if the land itself had produced him from the dust and the heat. Emma straightened her spine. We're fine, she said. Liam made a sound beside her that was not agreement. The man on the horse looked at her ankle. Then he looked at the boy. Then he looked back at her, and his expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, some internal calculation she wasn't invited into. That ankle real bad? He asked. I said we're fine. Yes, ma'am, I heard you. He didn't move. I'm asking anyway. Emma's jaw tightened. She was aware of how she looked, hair falling out of its pins, dress soaked through at the back, sitting in the middle of the road like something that had been dropped and forgotten. She was aware that she hadn't eaten since the night before, and that her hands were trembling slightly from the heat and the effort of holding herself together, and that the nearest town was still 4 miles up the road, and that her son was watching her with those careful, grown-too-soon eyes. She was aware of all of it. She was not going to accept help from a stranger on the road. We don't need anything from you, she said. Thank you for your concern. The man tilted his head very slightly, the way a person does when they've heard something that doesn't quite square with what they're looking at. Then, without a word, he swung down off his horse. I didn't say you needed anything, he said, dropping the reins over a low scrub brush. "I said your ankle looked bad." "Mr. Jake Hunter." He didn't offer a hand. He crouched down instead, a few feet away from her, bringing himself to her level without crowding her. Up close, he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe mid-30s, maybe a little beyond. With a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a week, and a quiet about him that felt less like shyness, and more like a man who'd learned to save his words for things that mattered. "And you are?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Emma Larson," she said, because refusing seemed more trouble than it was worth. "This is my son, Liam." "Liam." He glanced at the boy, nodded once. "That was a good holler you had, son. Carried real clear." Liam, who had inherited none of his mother's resistance to kindness, smiled despite himself. "Thank you, sir." "Don't encourage him," Emma said. Jake Hunter looked back at her. There was the faintest suggestion of something around his mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, but something adjacent to both. "How far are you headed?" he asked. "Town." "Millhaven?" "Yes." 4 miles, give or take. He said it the way you say something when you want the other person to do the math themselves. Emma did the math. She looked at her ankle. She looked at the road ahead, shimmering in the heat, empty in both directions. Then she looked at her son, who was watching Jake Hunter with the open, uncomplicated admiration that 7-year-old boys reserved for men on horses. "I'll manage," she said. "I don't doubt it." Jake sat back on his heels. "I'm also not going to ride off and leave a woman and a boy in the middle of the road with a busted ankle in 100-degree heat. So we might as well settle on a plan that doesn't involve you managing something you can't manage right now." It wasn't said unkindly. That was the part that made it harder to push back against. If he'd been condescending about it, if there had been any pity in it, she could have found the words to send him on his way. But his voice was flat and even, as if he were solving a problem of pure logistics. And there was something in that, in the absence of sympathy, that made her throat tighten in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't been spoken to like a competent adult in a long time. "My place is a mile back east," he said, "off the main road. You and the boy can rest there, get some water, eat something if you haven't." He looked at Liam again, briefly, then back at her. "I'll ride you into Millhaven myself, once you've had a chance to let that ankle settle." "We don't need charity." "All right. I mean it." "I know you do." He stood, brushed the dust off his knee. "It's not charity. I'm offering shelter and a ride. You'd do the same for someone in my position." Emma opened her mouth, closed it. He was right, and they both knew it, and she hated that he'd said it so plainly. Liam tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, with the particular urgency of a child who had spotted water in a desert. "He said food." Emma looked at her son, at the tight, hopeful set of his small face, at the dust caked into the creases of his neck, at the way his eyes tracked back and forth between her and the stranger with a desperate, wordless plea. He hadn't complained. Not once in 2 days of walking. He had carried his own pack without being asked, and kept up with her stride even when she'd been pushing too fast and he'd been breathing hard and saying nothing. 7 years old. "Fine," she said, and the word tasted like swallowing glass. "Thank you." Jake Hunter just nodded, as if the argument had never happened. He didn't make a production of helping her up. He moved to her side and offered his arm. Not his hand, his arm, forearm to forearm, the way you'd help someone who didn't want to feel like a burden. And she took it because there was no other choice. And he pulled her upright with a steadiness that suggested he was stronger than he looked, and wasn't interested in making her feel small about needing it. She hissed through her teeth when her weight came down on the ankle. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Try to walk on it. You'll make it worse." He looked at Liam. "You want to ride up top, son?" Liam looked at his mother. "Go ahead," she said. The boy's face opened like a sunrise. Jake settled him in the saddle first, took a moment to show him how to hold the pommel, then came back and looked at Emma with an expression that was carefully neutral. "I'm going to need to help you up," he said. "I figured." "You going to argue about it?" She met his eyes. "I already argued. Didn't do me much good." Something moved across his face then. Too quick to catch, too brief to name. "No," he said. "It didn't." He came around to her left side and got his arm around her waist, and she put her weight against him because there was nothing else to put it against. And if the contact was strange, or if the solidity of him was something she hadn't felt in 8 months, a person, substantial and present, holding her upright, she didn't let herself think about that. She focused on the horse, and on Liam grinning down from the saddle, and on the mechanics of getting herself up and settled without making a sound. She made one sound. He didn't comment on it. The cabin sat in a fold of the land, tucked back from the road behind a line of cottonwoods that had grown tall enough to give shade even in midsummer. It was not a grand place. Solid logs, a covered porch, a well out front with a bucket that still dripped from recent use. A small barn off to one side, neat and well kept. The kind of place a person built with their own hands and took care of because they had no one to take care of it for them. Emma noticed all of this without meaning to. She noticed the single chair on the porch, the boots left by the door, one set. The way the cabin faced west, toward the sunset, not the road, as if whoever had built it had wanted to watch the light go, not the people passing. Jake helped her down with the same wordless efficiency he'd used to get her up, then lifted Liam from the saddle with one arm, like the boy weighed nothing, set him on his feet, and led the horse toward the barn. "There's a pump inside," he said over his shoulder. "Help yourself." Liam was already through the door. Emma followed more slowly, half-hopping, one hand on the porch railing. Inside, the cabin was dim and cooler than the air outside. Not cool, but less brutal, the thick log walls doing what they were built to do. It was a single room, clean without being tidy, the kind of clean that came from regular use and not much excess. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, a wood stove with a pot sitting dark on top, shelves with flour and dried beans, and a few cans of things she couldn't read from where she stood. Liam was already at the pump, filling his hands, pouring water over his face with the extravagant joy of a child who had been too hot for too long. Emma sat down at the table before her leg could make the decision for her. She pressed her hands flat on the wood and breathed. She did not let herself think about how long it had been since she'd sat down at another person's table. She did not think about the house in Kansas that wasn't hers anymore, or the grave she'd left behind in the churchyard outside Caldwell, or the look on the bankman's face when he told her the note was called in, and the land was gone, and there was nothing left to discuss. She did not think about the weeks since then, moving from one place to the next, wearing out the charity of distant relatives until there was no more to wear, heading west because west was the direction people went when they had nowhere else to go. She didn't think about any of it. She thought about the ankle. Manageable. Probably not broken, or she couldn't have walked on it as long as she had. Badly sprained. She'd need to stay off it for a few days, which she didn't have. "Mama, there's actual food!" Liam appeared at her elbow, dripping water, pointing toward the shelves. "I can see it from here." "Don't touch anything." "I'm not touching anything. I'm just looking." "Look with your eyes, not your hands." "I am using my eyes. That's what I just said." Despite everything, despite the pain and the heat and the bone-deep exhaustion and the humiliation of sitting in a stranger's cabin because her body had failed her on a dusty road, Emma almost smiled. Almost. Jake came in from the barn a few minutes later, pulling his hat off and hanging it by the door. Without it, he looked different. Not younger exactly, but less guarded, the hard line of his brow softening slightly in the cabin's dim light. He went to the shelves without ceremony and started moving things around with the practiced ease of a man who knew where everything was and didn't need to think about it. "Beans," he said. "Salt pork. Cornbread if I can get the stove going. Nothing fancy." "You don't have to," Emma started. "I know I don't have to." He looked at her sideways, briefly. "I'm going to anyway." She stopped arguing. Liam climbed onto the chair across from her and watched Jake with the focused, unblinking attention he usually reserved for things he was trying to memorize. A new skill, a new word, a new person worth understanding. "Do you live here all by yourself?" the boy asked. Jake didn't look up from the stove. "Yep." "How come?" "Liam," Emma warned. "It's all right." Jake struck a match, held it to the kindling. "Just worked out that way." "Don't you get lonely?" The match burned down. Jake shook it out. He stood there for a moment, with his hand on the stove door, not answering. And Emma watched his back and the set of his shoulders, and thought that the question had landed somewhere it wasn't expected to. "Sometimes," he said finally. Liam considered this with the grave seriousness of a child processing new information about the world. "We've been lonely too," he said, "since Papa died." The air in the cabin shifted. Emma closed her eyes. "Liam," her voice was very quiet. "That's enough." "I'm just telling him." "I know what you're telling him. That's enough." Liam subsided. He looked down at the table and traced a scratch in the wood with one finger. And Emma looked at the wall, and Jake looked at the stove, and for a long moment no one said anything, and the only sound was the fire starting to catch. Then Jake said, "How long ago?" Emma looked at him. He was still facing the stove, not looking at her. His voice had not changed, still flat, still even. But the question was there, and it was real, and he had asked it anyway, which meant he was either foolish or he didn't think grief was something to walk around careful. 8 months, she said. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something confirms what he already suspected. "Where are you headed in Millhaven?" he asked. "Back to business." She was grateful for it. "There's a woman there, friend of my mother's. She said I could come." Emma paused. "She doesn't know exactly when." "She expecting you?" "She's expecting me eventually." Jake turned from the stove then and looked at her directly, not with pity, not with assessment, just with the straight, considering look of a man deciding how to say what he was thinking. "Emma," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. She didn't know why it registered. "That ankle needs 2 or 3 days," he said, "minimum. You walk into Millhaven on it tonight, you'll do damage that won't heal right." He paused. "You're welcome to stay here." She stared at him. "There's nothing improper about it," he said, with the directness of a man who had anticipated the objection. "Liam's here. I'll sleep in the barn. You take the bed." "I'm not taking your bed." "Then we'll argue about it later. Right now the fire's going and the beans need water, and your boy looks like he hasn't eaten in 2 days. He said it without judgment. He said it the way you state a fact, because it was a fact, because it was the thing happening in the room, because there was no point in dressing it up. Emma's throat tightened. One day, she had told herself when she left Caldwell. One day at a time. Don't think about the week ahead or the month ahead, or the terrifying, formless future that kept trying to swallow her whole. Just the day. Just the next step. Just the next thing in front of you. Right now, the thing in front of her was a man she'd met an hour ago, offering her shelter and something to eat. She looked at her son, who was watching her with those careful eyes, and she thought about pride and what it cost and who paid for it. 2 days, she said. Jake looked at her steadily. 2 days. And I'll help. I'm not going to sit here and be waited on. Didn't ask you to. And Liam helps too. He's old enough. Yes, ma'am. She nodded. He nodded. And that was that. A negotiation conducted in fewer than 50 words by two people who had each, in their own separate ways, learned how to survive by keeping things simple. Liam looked back and forth between them with the expression of someone who has just watched two cats decide not to fight, simultaneously relieved and mildly disappointed. "Can I have water?" he asked. "Pump's right there," Jake said. "Help yourself." The boy slid off his chair and went to it, and Jake turned back to the stove, and Emma sat at the table and put her elbows on the wood and looked at her hands. Rougher than they used to be. Thinner. A small scar on the left thumb from a fence wire in February she hadn't had time to clean properly. She did not know this man. She did not know this place. She was sitting in a stranger's cabin in the middle of a summer afternoon with a broken-down ankle and a 7-year-old, and everything she owned packed into 2 bags that weighed 30 pounds between them. This was not the life she had planned. But Liam was at the pump, splashing water on his arms and making the small, satisfied sounds of a child who had found a simple pleasure. And somewhere behind her, the fire was going, and the beans were going into the pot, and the smell of it, the plain, ordinary smell of food being made in a kitchen, was doing something to her chest she wasn't prepared for. She pressed her hands flat on the table, breathed. One day. Just the day in front of you. Outside, the sun began its long slide toward the western hills, and the cottonwoods threw their shadows long across the yard. And inside the cabin, 3 people who had each lost something they could not get back sat together in the quiet and the warmth of a fire, and none of them said anything about it, because some things you don't have to say out loud to know they're true. The beans were better than they had any right to be. Emma ate 2 full bowls and didn't apologize for it, and Jake refilled her cup with water without being asked, and Liam ate until his eyes went heavy, and he started listing sideways in his chair with the slow, boneless surrender of a child who had finally run out of will to stay awake. Jake caught the bowl before it tipped. He did it the way he did everything, without ceremony, without making it a moment. Emma watched him carry Liam to the bed. She watched the way he held the boy, careful, like something breakable, one hand supporting the back of his neck, and the way he set him down and stepped back and pulled the thin blanket up to his chin without waking him. And she thought that you could learn a lot about a person from the way they handled a sleeping child. Whether they were gentle because they were being watched, or gentle because that was simply what they were. Jake stepped back from the bed and looked at her. "You should sleep too," he said. "I'm not tired." He didn't argue. He pulled the second chair up to the table and sat. And for a while, neither of them spoke. And the fire in the stove burned low, and the night insects started up outside. And Emma sat with her hands around her cup and tried to remember the last time she'd sat in a room with another adult and not felt the specific, grinding weight of needing something from them. It had been a while. "The blanket's on the shelf," Jake said, "if you get cold. It's July. It drops out here, more than people expect." Emma looked at him. "You've lived here long?" 6 years. "Alone the whole time?" A pause. Brief, but she caught it. "No," he said, "not the whole time." She waited. The way you wait when you sense a person is deciding whether to go further. He didn't. She didn't push. She understood, better than most, the particular geography of things you're not ready to say yet. The way certain words sit in your chest like stones that haven't found their way out. She had a whole collection of them herself. "I'll take the barn," he said, standing. There's a latch on the door, inside. Use it if it makes you feel better. It won't be necessary. No, but use it anyway. He said it quietly, and then he took his hat off the hook and went out. And Emma sat alone at the table in another person's house and listened to the sound of his boots on the porch steps. And then, the quiet. She sat there for a long time before she moved to the bed. She didn't sleep well. The ankle throbbed in a steady rhythm that her body couldn't tune out. And the strangeness of the mattress, the different quality of the dark, the unfamiliar sounds of the land around the cabin, all of it kept pulling her back from the edge of sleep just when she was reaching it. She lay on her side, with Liam tucked against her back, and watched the sliver of night sky she could see through the one window. And she thought about Millhaven, and the woman there she hadn't seen in 11 years, and whether showing up half-broken on the stranger's doorstep was going to be the version of herself she had to introduce first. She thought about Tom. She always thought about Tom when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't the grief that did it anymore, not the sharp, gutting kind that had hollowed her out for the first 3 months. It was something quieter now, the specific absence of him, the way she'd reach across the bed, half awake, and find nothing, every night, and have to remember all over again. 8 months. She closed her eyes and made herself stop. Morning came fast and hot. Emma was up before either of them, which she had not intended. She had intended to sleep until the ankle felt manageable, and then be useful before Jake came in from the barn and had any reason to treat her like an invalid. Instead, she swung her legs off the bed at first light and stood up and put weight on the ankle, and said a word she was glad Liam wasn't awake to hear. It was worse. Not catastrophically worse, but worse. She stood at the table with both hands flat on it and breathed through it and tried to think rationally. She had walked on worse than this. She had walked 11 miles with a fever in February to get Liam to the doctor in Caldwell when the roads were iced over. And she had made it, and she had been fine. This was not that. This was a sprained ankle in July, in a warm cabin with food on the shelf and a pump that worked. She could manage this. She was reaching for the pot on the shelf when the cabin door opened. Jake stopped in the doorway, took one look at her, and said, "What are you doing?" "Making coffee. You're standing on that ankle." "I noticed." He crossed the room in 4 steps. "Sit down." "I'm not going to—" "Emma." He said her name the same way he'd said it the night before. Flat, not unkind, but final. "Sit down before you fall down. I'll make the coffee." "I've been making my own coffee since I was 12 years old." "Good. Then you know how it's done. You can instruct me." She stared at him. He looked back at her with those gray eyes that gave away nothing, and waited. She sat down. He made the coffee. She watched him move around the kitchen with the ease of a man in his own space, and she thought about how strange it was, being in someone else's routine, watching the small, automatic gestures of a life that had organized itself without you in it. The way he knew without looking which shelf the grounds were on, the way he checked the fire like it was a reflex, not a decision. "You sleep?" he asked without turning. "Some." "Ankle?" "It'll be fine." He turned and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has heard that particular lie before. "It's worse this morning," she said, because apparently she was past the point of lying convincingly. "It'll settle." "Probably." He poured the coffee and set a cup in front of her. "Give it a day." "I gave it a night." "A day, Emma." The use of her name again. She wasn't sure why it kept landing that way, like something solid in a lot of uncertain ground. "I'm not going to be a burden in your house," she said. "You're not a burden." "You're sleeping in the barn." "I've slept in worse." He sat across from her, both hands around his cup. "Honestly, the barn's fine. Better air." She watched him for a moment. Why are you doing this? He raised an eyebrow. You don't know us, she said. You don't owe us anything. Most men would have ridden past. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just thinking. The way he seemed to think about everything, like he was choosing which words were worth using. Most men would have stopped, he said. A woman and a child on the road in that heat? Any decent man stops. That's not an answer. It's the one I've got. Emma looked at him across the table. Something in his expression told her that was true. Not that he was hiding more, but that he genuinely hadn't examined it further than that. Some people did right things without building a story around it. She had met very few of them. Liam appeared from the bed at that moment, hair flattened on one side, eyes barely open, dragging the blanket behind him like a tail. Is that coffee? He said, with the hopeful suspicion of a child who knows the answer is no. No, Emma said. Is there anything else? Jake stood. Cornbread left from last night. Liam's face resolved itself into profound relief. The morning moved slowly, and then, all at once. Liam, fed and awake and restored to his full operational capacity, began his systematic investigation of the cabin and its surroundings with the thoroughness of a small government inspector. He asked Jake the name of the horse, the name of the barn cat he'd spotted, whether the well was deep, whether there were snakes, whether Jake had ever shot anyone, and whether cowboys were real or just in stories. Jake answered every question with the same patient economy. Horse. Ranger. Cat. Didn't have a name. She just came with the place. Well, about 40 feet. Snakes. Yes, but they kept to themselves, mostly. Shot anyone? That question got a pause, and a look, and a, that's a conversation for when you're older. Cowboys. Depends on what you mean by real. Emma sat at the table and listened and made herself useful, shelling dried beans, which required no standing and no ankle. And she told herself the warmth she felt watching her son talk to this man was simple relief that Liam was safe and fed and temporarily unburdened from the weight of traveling with a mother held together by stubbornness and prayer. It wasn't more than that. She was nearly sure. It was mid-morning when the first knock came at the door. Jake's posture changed before he even moved toward it. Not dramatically. A subtle shift. The way a man's shoulders set when they're preparing for something they're not looking forward to. Emma noticed it and filed it away without comment. He opened the door. The man outside was heavy-set, red-faced from the heat, with a badge pinned to his vest that caught the sun. Deputy, by the look of it. Behind him, half a step back, stood another man Emma didn't recognize. Thinner, watching the exchange with the particular alertness of someone who has come to see something specific happen. Hunter, the deputy said. Caldwell. Jake's voice had flattened in a way Emma hadn't heard before. The deputy looked past Jake into the cabin. His eyes found Emma, then Liam, then came back to Jake with an expression that was doing several things at once. Picking up strays? He said. Emma felt something tighten in her jaw. Woman and her boy needed help, Jake said. That a problem? Depends, Caldwell smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had nothing friendly in it. Town's been talking about you, Hunter. You know how people are. Man lives alone out here long enough, people start to wonder. His eyes slid back to Emma. Ma'am, you all right out here? Emma looked at the deputy steadily. I'm fine, thank you. You sure about that? 'Cause you don't have to stay if you don't want to. I'm aware of that. Just making sure you know you've got options. Deputy. Emma's voice came out quieter than she intended, which was sometimes more dangerous than loud. This man pulled my son and me off the road in 100-degree heat when my ankle gave out. He fed us and gave us shelter, and slept in his barn so we had the bed. That's all that's happened here. If you've got questions beyond that, I'd be happy to answer them in writing, to whoever needs to hear it." Silence. The thin man behind Caldwell looked at the ground. The deputy's smile went stiff at the edges. "No need for that, ma'am." "Good." She held his gaze. "Then I think we're done." Caldwell looked at Jake one more time. That same look, the kind that carries a history she hadn't been given access to. And then touched his hat and stepped back. "You have a good day, Hunter," he said. "Always do," Jake said. He closed the door. The room was quiet. Liam, who had been watching from the corner with wide eyes, looked at his mother. "What was that?" he said. "Nothing," Emma said. Jake had turned away from the door. He stood with his back to them for just a moment, and Emma watched the set of his shoulders, the way he brought himself back from wherever that encounter had taken him. And then he turned around, and his face was even. "That ankle need wrapping?" he said. "Jake." "I've got clean cloth. It'll help with the swelling." "Jake." She said it more firmly, and he stopped and looked at her and waited. "What was that about?" He was quiet. "What do they say about you?" she asked. "In town?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he went to the chair and sat, and he put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. And Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, 3 years ago, there was an accident. On the Miller Ranch, east of town. Fire. One of the hands died." He stopped. "They said it was my fault." The room was very still. "Was it?" Emma asked. He looked up at her. Whatever she'd expected to see in his face, anger, defensiveness, the retreat of a man who has been asked something he wasn't ready for, wasn't there. What was there was something older than all of that. Something that had been examined from every angle until there was nothing left to flinch from. "No," he said, "but I was there, and I was the one who walked away." Liam had gone very quiet in his corner. Emma looked at Jake Hunter, at the plain, undecorated truth of what he'd said, and the way he'd said it, and the life that had arranged itself around that event like water around a stone. And she thought about what it meant to live in a small territory with a story following you that wasn't the whole story. She knew something about that. Not the same story, but the shape of it. "Is that why you're out here?" she said, "instead of in town?" "Partly." He stood. "And partly, I just prefer the quiet." He went to the shelf and came back with a length of clean cloth. He crouched in front of her chair without asking permission, the same way he'd crouched in the road. Below her eye level, not crowding her, and looked up. "May I?" he said. She looked down at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. He wrapped the ankle with the same careful efficiency he brought to everything, and Emma watched the top of his head and thought about the deputy's face and the fire 3 years ago, and the man who had walked away when someone else hadn't. And she thought that carrying something like that alone, out here, with no one to tell you were wrong about what you deserved, was its own particular kind of hard. "Thank you," she said when he was done. "For before, with the deputy." "You did that yourself," he said. Still, he stood and looked at her, and something crossed between them that wasn't simple. Something that had to do with recognition, the way two people sometimes look at each other and realize they have been living in adjacent kinds of pain without knowing it. Liam broke it, because Liam broke most things. "Can I go see the horse?" he said. Jake looked at him. "You know how to be around horses?" "No." "Then I'll come with you." He looked at Emma. "You'll be all right?" "I'll be more than all right. I'll be shelling beans and grateful to do it." That thing moved across his face again, too quick to catch, too brief to name. And then he put his hat on and held the door open for Liam, and they went out.
The afternoon heat peaked and passed. Emma moved carefully around the cabin, doing what she could with what she could reach. The beans, the table wiped down, the cups washed and set back on the shelf. She told herself she was paying her way. She told herself it was practical. She did not tell herself it felt good to be useful in a space, to have her hands doing something that would matter to someone at the end of the day. Through the single window she could hear Liam talking. Just the shape of his voice, not the words. Quick and enthusiastic, the way he got when something had his full attention. She heard Jake's voice underneath it, less frequent, answering in the lower register she was beginning to recognize as his ordinary speaking mode. She leaned on the table and just listened for a moment. And then she heard Liam say, clear as anything, "My papa used to work with horses." The pause that followed. And Jake's voice. "Yeah?" "He was good at it. Mama says he talked to them like people." Another pause. Longer. "Some horses," Jake said. "You have to." "Do you?" "Sometimes." Emma turned away from the window. She pressed the backs of her hands against her eyes for a moment. Not long, just long enough. And then she straightened and went back to the beans. They came in for supper when the light changed. Liam was sunburned across his nose and talking about Ranger with the ownership of a boy who has decided something belongs to him spiritually, if not legally. Jake ate without much comment, refilling Liam's water without being asked, answering the running monologue with the occasional one-word response that somehow never seemed insufficient. Emma watched and ate, and did not say what she was thinking. After supper, Liam fell asleep faster than the night before. Heat and horses and a day of being a child taking their full toll. Emma sat at the table with the remains of her coffee and listened to him breathe, and thought that he hadn't slept so quickly or so completely in months. That was something. "He's a good boy," Jake said. Emma looked up. He was sitting across from her, hat off, looking at the sleeping child with an expression that was the most unguarded she'd seen on him. "He is," she said. "Carries a lot for his age." "I know." The words came out rough. "I've tried to—" She stopped, started again. "I've tried to make sure he doesn't carry mine, too. I don't know how well I've managed it." Jake was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't seem broken by it," he said. "That's not nothing." Emma looked at him, surprised by the precision of it, because that was exactly the thing she'd been afraid of. Not that Liam would struggle. Children struggled, that was survivable. But broken was something else, and the fear of it had lived in her chest for 8 months, like a splinter she couldn't find. "You said that like you know the difference," she said. He held her gaze. "I know the difference." She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But between them, in the small space across the table, something settled that hadn't been settled before. "Emma," he said, "I want to ask you something, and you can tell me to mind my own business." She waited. "The woman in Millhaven," he said. "What happens if she can't take you in?" The question hit with the quiet force of something she hadn't let herself look at directly. "She'll take us in," Emma said. "But if she can't—" "She will." "Emma." She looked at her hands, the small scar on her left thumb, the thinness of her fingers. "I don't know," she said, because he had asked it honestly, and she owed him the same. "I don't have an answer after that." He nodded slowly. "I'm not telling you this to worry you," he said. "I just wanted you to know that if Millhaven doesn't work out—" He stopped, seemed to be measuring something. "There's room here, for a while, if you needed it." Emma looked up fast. His face was even, no pity in it, no expectation. just the same flat, direct offering he'd been making since the moment he'd crouched in the road next to her. "Jake, it's a practical thing," he said. "I'm not saying it any other way. You can work once the ankle heals. There's always more to do on a place like this than one person can do." And Liam, something shifted in his expression. "He's good with the horse. Ranger doesn't like most people." Emma stared at him. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said. "I'm just telling you the option exists." She opened her mouth. And then the second knock came at the door. Sharp, unexpected, nothing like the first. And both of them went still. And the lamp between them flickered in a draft from somewhere. And Emma felt the first real chill of the night move through the room. Jake stood. His hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall beside the door. Not dramatic, just automatic. The reflex of a man who had lived alone long enough to know that late knocking meant something different from early knocking. He opened the door. The woman on the porch was somewhere past 60, bony-shouldered and sharp-eyed, with dust on her skirt and a look on her face that said she had come a long way and was not in the mood to be patient about it. She looked at Jake. Then she looked past him at Emma. Her expression changed. "Emma Larson," she said. Emma's blood went cold. "You know me?" Emma said slowly. "I know your name." The woman's eyes moved to Liam, still sleeping on the bed, then back. "I've been riding since morning. I need to tell you something. About the woman in Millhaven." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. "What about her?" Emma said. The woman looked at Jake, then back at Emma. "She passed," she said. 3 weeks ago. Word came down the line slow. I only heard it myself 2 days back. I've been trying to find you since." The floor did not move. The walls did not move. Everything in the cabin held perfectly still. Emma held perfectly still with it. "She's gone," the woman said, more gently. "I'm sorry." Jake said nothing. He stood by the door with his hand at his side and watched Emma's face. And Emma looked at the table, at the cup in her hands, at the place she'd been sitting when she thought she had somewhere to go. Liam slept on. And Emma sat in another person's house with nowhere left to be. And the question Jake had asked her, what happens if it doesn't work out, hung in the air between them like something neither of them was ready to touch. The woman's name was Ruth Aldane. She had known Emma's mother years back, before the war, before the land changed hands and everyone scattered. She sat at Jake's table with a cup of water she'd accepted without ceremony, and told Emma what she knew in plain, unadorned sentences. That Margaret Holt had died of a fever in late June, that she'd had no family left in Millhaven to speak of, that a neighbor had written it down and sent word along the road, and it had taken 3 weeks to find the right person to carry it. Emma listened without interrupting. She had discovered, somewhere in the past 8 months, that grief had a second layer. The grief that hit not when something ended, but when you lost the thing you'd been hanging your future on. Tom dying had been the first kind. This was the second kind. Quieter in some ways, more disorienting. The first kind had a clear shape. This was just nothing. A door you'd been walking toward for weeks, and you arrived, and it wasn't there. Ruth Aldane watched her face. "Do you have anyone else?" "No," Emma said. "Not out west." "Back east?" "Nothing I can go back to." Ruth pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. She was a practical woman. She didn't dress it up with apologies or false comfort. Emma appreciated that more than she could say. "I've got a half room in Millhaven," Ruth said. "It's not much, but you and the boy could sleep there while you figure out next steps. Week, maybe 2.
Emma looked at her hands. You rode out here to tell me that. I rode out here because somebody had to. Ruth stood, set her cup down. Think on it. I'll be at the Millhaven Inn through tomorrow night. She looked at Jake. Much obliged for the water. Safe ride, Jake said, and she was gone. The cabin was very quiet after that. The lamp burned low. Liam slept on, undisturbed by any of it, and Emma sat at the table and did not move for a long time. Jake didn't speak. He didn't offer anything, not platitudes, not solutions, not the reflexive reassurances people reached for when they didn't know what else to do. He just stayed in the room, which was its own kind of thing. The stain. Finally, Emma said, I need to think. All right. Alone. He stood without hesitation. I'll be in the barn. She heard his boots cross the floor, heard the door open and close, and then she was alone in the quiet of his cabin with her son sleeping 10 feet away, and she put her hands over her face and let herself feel the full weight of it. All of it. The whole accumulated mass of the past 8 months. For exactly 60 seconds. Then she took her hands down, and she started thinking. She was still at the table when the light outside shifted from black to the deep blue that came just before dawn. She'd slept a little in the chair. Not enough to call sleep, really. More like her body forcing short intervals of unconsciousness when her mind couldn't hold anymore. The ankle had stiffened overnight. She stood slowly and walked to the window with both hands trailing furniture for balance. And she stood there and looked at the pale line along the eastern hills and thought about Ruth Aldane's half room and what 2 weeks bought you if you used them right. She was still standing there when she heard the barn door. Jake crossed the yard. She could hear him, not see him yet, and then his boots hit the porch steps, and the door opened, and he stepped inside and stopped. He looked at her standing at the window. He looked at the way she was holding herself, both hands gripping the window frame, weight on one foot, jaw set. You didn't sleep, he said. I slept some. He moved to the stove without asking and started the fire, and Emma watched him and thought that there was something almost unbearable about ordinary gestures in moments like this, the simple mechanics of a morning continuing regardless. Jake. He looked up. The offer you made last night, she said, before Ruth came. Did you mean it? He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking. She could tell the difference now. Yes, he said. You don't know me. I know enough. You know I've got a sprained ankle and a 7-year-old and nowhere to go. I know you got in the face of a deputy sheriff on my behalf, 12 hours after I pulled you out of the road, he said. And I know you haven't asked me for a single thing you thought you could manage without. And I know your boy talks to that horse like he's known him his whole life. He turned back to the stove. I know enough. Emma stood at the window and felt something move through her chest that she didn't quite have a name for. It would be a work arrangement, she said carefully. Nothing else. That's what I said. I mean it, Jake. So do I. He didn't turn around. I'm not asking for anything, Emma. I'm asking you not to walk 4 miles on a bad ankle to a half room in Millhaven when there's a full room right here. That's all. She looked at his back, at the steadiness of him, at the way he stood in his own space without taking up more of it than he needed. She thought about Ruth's half room and 2 weeks and what came after. She thought about Liam and Ranger and the way her son had slept, deeply, trustingly, for the first time in months. 1 month, she said. We'll try 1 month. I work, Liam helps where he can, and at the end of it, we reassess. No obligations on either side. Jake turned from the stove and looked at her steadily. 1 month, he said. She nodded. He nodded. And that was the second agreement they'd made across that table, in fewer words than most people used to order breakfast. Liam woke up 20 minutes later and ate cornbread and was told the news in the plain, direct way Emma had always handled things with him. They were going to stay for a while. They were going to help around the place. They were guests who earned their keep. Liam listened with the focused attention he gave to information that mattered. Asked 2 questions. Did that mean he could see Ranger every day? And did he have to do the same chores as grown-ups? Received satisfactory answers to both, and considered the matter settled. Emma watched him go tearing out toward the barn, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. The first week passed in the way first weeks in new places always passed. Strangely, then faster, then like it had always been. Emma's ankle improved enough by the 3rd day that she could move without gripping furniture, though Jake still watched her from the corner of his eye in a way she pretended not to notice. She took over the cooking without discussion because it was the most she could contribute while she was limited in her movement. And she was better at it than he was. Not dramatically better, but noticeably. And he ate everything she made without comment and refilled his own plate a second time, which she took as sufficient appreciation. She learned the shape of his days. Up before dawn, barn first, then coffee, then whatever the land needed. Fence lines, water, the slow, perpetual maintenance of a working property. He moved through it without complaint and without conversation, which she had initially taken for coldness, and had since revised to a more accurate diagnosis. He was a man who talked when he had something to say, and otherwise got on with things. There was a freedom in that she hadn't expected. She didn't have to fill the silence. She didn't have to perform cheerfulness or gratitude, or any of the social shapes she'd been holding herself into for the past 8 months, just to make other people comfortable with her situation. She could simply be where she was, doing what needed doing, and that was enough. On the 4th evening, she found herself telling him about Tom. She hadn't planned to. They were on the porch, her on the chair, him on the top step, both of them watching the sky go dark at the end of a hot day. And she'd been quiet for a while, and then she just started talking. The way you do sometimes when the quiet gets a certain quality to it, permissive and still. She told him about the farm in Kansas, about Tom, who had been patient and good-humored, and who could fix anything mechanical, but was hopeless with animals, and had known it and laughed about it. About the year they'd had before everything went wrong. The drought. Then the note. Then Tom getting sick in February and not getting better the way she'd told herself he would. About the day she'd understood that he wasn't going to, and the way she'd sat in the kitchen that morning and looked at the wall for an hour before she allowed herself to feel it. Jake listened without interrupting, without offering. When she stopped, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said. "He was a genuinely good man." She paused. "Those aren't as common as people like to think." Jake looked out at the darkening horizon. "No," he said, "they're not." She looked at him sideways. "The accident," she said, 3 years ago. The one the deputy mentioned. You said it wasn't your fault." "It wasn't." "Then why are you still here, letting people think what they think?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because the man who died, Daniel Miller, he had a family. And if I'd pushed back, made noise about it, the story would have been ugly for them too. They'd already lost him. I didn't see the point in making them relive it in public, so I could clear my name." Emma stared at him. Jake, "It's done," he said simply. "It was 3 years ago." People think what they want to think." He looked at her. "You know that as well as I do." She did know that. She knew exactly that. She looked at this man, at the quiet, stubborn, impractical goodness of what he'd just told her, and felt something shift in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine. "The Millers should have told people the truth," she said. "Maybe," he shrugged slightly.
"I don't lose sleep over it. Doesn't it make you angry?" "Used to." He looked at the horizon. "Now it just is what it is." Emma shook her head slowly. "I'd have been furious," she said. "I'd have burned the whole thing down." That moved across his face again, the thing that wasn't quite a smile. "I know," he said. The second week was when the trouble started. It came in the form of Harding Pell, who was the largest landowner in the county and had been for 20 years, and who rode up to Jake's fence line on a Tuesday morning with 2 men behind him and a look on his face that said he hadn't come to talk about the weather. Emma was hanging washing on the line when she heard the horses. She turned and looked, and something in the way the 3 men held themselves made her go still. Jake was already walking toward them from the barn. "Hunter," Pell said, without getting down from his horse. He was a big man, older, with silver-gray hair and the kind of permanent sunburn that came from a lifetime of looking down at things from horseback. "Heard you've got a woman and a boy staying here." "You heard right," Jake said. Pell looked at Emma. She looked back. She did not fold her washing. "Thought I should come by personally," Pell said, "as a neighbor. Make sure everything's in order." "Everything's in order," Jake said. "See, the thing is," Pell leaned on his pommel, "there's been some talk about the situation. People are concerned." "Are they?" "A widow woman, a young boy, out here alone with you." He tilted his head. "It doesn't look right, Hunter. You know how this valley is. People talk." Jake's voice hadn't changed. "People always talk." "This is different." Pell's eyes moved back to Emma. "Ma'am, I run the largest operation in this county. I've got a bunkhouse, cook staff. If you're in need of a proper situation—" "I'm in a proper situation," Emma said. Pell blinked. He hadn't expected that. Men like him, Emma had found, rarely expected to be interrupted. "I appreciate the concern," she said, because she was going to be polite if it killed her. "But we're staying." "Ma'am, I'm not sure you understand what—" "I understand perfectly." She set the shirt she'd been holding back in the basket and looked at him squarely. "I'm a grown woman making a choice about where I live and who I work for. I don't require anyone's input on that." Pell looked at Jake. Jake looked back at him with nothing in his face. "This land," Pell said, and his voice changed, dropped into something lower and more deliberate. "I've made you a fair offer 3 times, Hunter. The answer's still no?" "The answer's still no," Jake said. "That's a shame." Pell straightened in the saddle. "A real shame. Man living out here alone, no family, no connection to the community. Trouble has a way of finding people like that." The air between them went tight and flat. "Is that a threat, Pell?" Jake said. "It's an observation." Pell looked at Emma one last time. "Good day, ma'am." He turned his horse and rode, and his 2 men followed, and Emma stood in the yard with a shirt in her hands and watched them go. When they were out of sight, she looked at Jake. "He wants your land," she said. "Has for 4 years. "What's on it?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Water," he said. "Creek runs through the south pasture. Only reliable water source in the 3-mile radius. In a dry summer—" He stopped. "It's worth more than the land." Emma looked at the direction the riders had gone. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No." "Have you talked to anyone about it? Legal claim? Anything?" Jake made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "The only lawyer in Millhaven is Pell's brother-in-law." Emma looked at him. "I know," he said. "Jake,"
She picked up her basket. "We need to talk about this." "It's not your problem." She looked at him with an expression that stopped him cold. "I am living on your land," she said, clearly and precisely. "If something threatens this land, it threatens my son's roof. That makes it my problem, so don't tell me it isn't." He held her gaze. Then he said, "All right." That evening, after Liam was in bed, they sat at the table, and Jake laid out the facts the way he'd been laying out facts since she'd met him. Flat, without drama, all of it. Pell had been pressuring him for 4 years. The first 2 years it had been offers. Fair ones, even generous ones. Then the offers had stopped, and the problems had started. A fence line cut. Water in the north field redirected. 2 of his horses spooked and turned out on the road. Nothing he could prove. Nothing with Pell's name on it directly. "And the deputy," Emma said. "Caldwell. He's Pell's man?" "Has been since before I arrived." "Of course he is." Emma sat back. "So any complaint you make—" "Goes nowhere." She drummed her fingers on the table. This was a thing she did when she was thinking hard. He'd noticed it in the past week, the way her hands moved when her mind was working. "There has to be a way to go around Caldwell," she said.
A county sheriff? Federal marshal? Nearest federal authority is 3 days' ride. That's not impossible. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her. I just haven't had... He stopped. Someone to talk through it with, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And then the sound came from outside. A sharp crack, sudden and close, and then the unmistakable sound of something large moving fast through the dark. Jake was at the door before Emma could react. He pulled it open, and Emma was right behind him, ignoring the ankle. And they both stood on the porch and looked at the barn. The barn door was open. Ranger was gone. Jake went off the porch at a run. Emma turned back inside. She went to the shelf where the lantern hung and lit it with hands that were steady, because she made them steady. And she brought it outside and held it up and moved toward the fence line and looked at the ground. Hoof prints. More than one horse, coming from the south pasture side, the direction Pell's men had ridden. "Jake!" she called. He came out of the dark at a run, hatless, something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not panic. Something colder than panic. "Ranger's in the south field," he said. "Gate was open. He's all right." Emma held the lantern down toward the prints. "They were here," she said. "Tonight. After dark." Jake crouched beside her and looked. His jaw was tight. "This is what he does," Jake said. "Reminds me what he can do." Emma looked at the prints in the lantern light. Then she looked up. "Jake." Her voice was very quiet, which was sometimes more dangerous than loud. "I want you to listen to me carefully." He looked at her. "I've been in a situation where a powerful man thought he could grind someone down through patience and inconvenience and the slow removal of their options." She held his gaze. "That's what this is. He's not going to stop. Not ever. And the only way you stop it is to make it cost him more than it costs you." The lantern between them threw unsteady light across both their faces. "I have an idea," she said, "but you have to trust me." He looked at her for a long moment. At this woman he'd pulled off a road 9 days ago, who had stood up to a deputy and a powerful landowner without flinching, who had sat up all night to find her footing and come out the other side with her spine still straight. "All right," he said. "All right, you'll hear it. Or, all right, you'll do it." He looked at her. "Both," he said. And in the space of that single word, something shifted between them that had nothing to do with Pell or the land
or the water rights, or any of the practical, pressing, real things that surrounded them. Neither of them said anything about it. But they both felt it. And behind them, in the dark cabin, Liam slept on without knowing that the world his mother was building around him had just changed shape in a way none of them had planned for. Emma's idea was simple enough that Jake should have thought of it himself. "You need a witness," she said. "Not a lawyer, not a marshal 3 days away. A witness. Someone with standing in this county who has seen what Pell does and will say so in writing under their own name." Jake looked at her across the table. "Everyone in this county either works for Pell or owes him something." "Not everyone." She leaned forward. "Ruth Aldane. She's been in this valley longer than Pell has. She doesn't owe him anything. She told me herself she runs her own cattle, her own land, clear title. And she was here. She saw those men ride past her on the road 2 days ago when she came to find me. She can place Pell's riders in this direction on that date." Jake was quiet. "One signed statement from an independent landowner," Emma said, "sent directly to the county seat. Not through Caldwell, over him, to the county land commissioner, documenting a pattern of intimidation and property interference. It doesn't win the war, but it puts something on record. It makes it cost him." She held his gaze. "You said the only lawyer in Millhaven is Pell's brother-in-law. But the county commissioner answers to the territory, not to Millhaven. And territory officials are elected. They care about their names on things." Jake sat back slowly. "You've done this before," he said. "Tom tried to fight the bank through local channels," she said. "He lost. I spent 3 months after he died figuring out every other channel there was." She paused. "I lost that too, but I learned how it works." "And you think Ruth will do it?" "I think Ruth rode half a day through July heat to tell a woman she barely knew that her plans had fallen through. I think she's the kind of person who does things because they're right, not because they're easy." Emma sat back. "I'll ask her tomorrow." Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Tomorrow's a 3-mile ride to Millhaven on a bad ankle." "Then I'll take Ranger." "You said you couldn't ride." "I said Liam couldn't ride. I didn't say anything about myself." He looked at her. She looked back. "I'll take you," he said. "You don't have to, Emma." He said it with a particular flatness that had stopped her mid-sentence 3 times in 2 weeks and showed no signs of losing its effectiveness. "I'll take you." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded. They left before the heat peaked, Liam riding up in front of Jake on Ranger with the focused solemnity of a boy performing an important responsibility. Emma riding the older mare Jake kept for practical work, steady and unhurried, which suited the ankle. Millhaven was not a grand town. A main street with the standard arrangement of things: dry goods, a smithy, a bank with new paint that didn't quite match the building, a saloon that was doing business earlier than it probably should have been. The kind of town that was still deciding what it wanted to be. Emma felt the eyes before she saw the people. She'd grown up in a small town. She knew the specific quality of attention that followed strangers. And she knew the different, sharper quality that followed a woman who was somewhere she'd been decided she shouldn't be. She felt both as they came down the main street, and she kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and ignored it. Liam, who had no such radar, waved at a group of men on the saloon porch. One of them waved back. Jake did not appear to notice any of it, which Emma suspected was not because he didn't notice, but because he had long since made peace with being noticed. Ruth Aldane was exactly where she'd said she would be, at the inn, in the narrow sitting room off the main hall, drinking coffee and reading a letter with the focused attention of a woman who did not waste her mornings. She looked up when Emma came in, then looked past her at Jake in the doorway, then back at Emma, and something in her sharp, knowing eyes suggested she was doing the kind of arithmetic that older women were quietly expert at. "You stayed," Ruth said. "I stayed," Emma said. "I need to ask you something." Ruth set her letter down. "Sit." It took 20 minutes. Emma laid it out the way Jake had laid it out to her. Flat, factual, nothing dressed up. The 4 years of pressure. The fence cut and the water redirected and the horses turned out. The visit from Pell yesterday. The riders in the dark last night. The hoof prints in the south pasture. Ruth listened without interrupting. Her face, during all of it, was the face of a woman doing the arithmetic on something she already suspected. When Emma finished, Ruth said, "Pell's been doing this to small operators for 20 years. He did it to the Greer family west of here, ran them off in a season." She looked at Jake. "You've lasted longer than most." "It's my land," Jake said. "I know it is." Ruth looked at Emma. "You want a statement. In writing." "To the county commissioner," Emma said, "directly. Documenting what you've seen and what you know." "What I've seen," Ruth said, "is those riders on the road 2 nights ago, heading in your direction, 3 hours after Pell left your fence line. I know those horses. 2 of them came from Pell's stock. I've seen them at market." She paused. "What I know is 20 years of the same pattern." "Will you sign it?" Emma said. Ruth looked at her steadily. "You write it," she said. "You seem like a woman who knows how to write something that sticks. I'll sign it." Emma felt something in her chest release. "There's something else," Ruth said. Her voice had changed. Not softer, but more careful. The way you go careful when you're about to hand someone something fragile. "The reason I stayed an extra day." She looked at Emma. "I heard something this morning, down at the dry goods, about you." Emma went still. "Someone in this town knows you," Ruth said, "or knows your name. A man came into the dry goods this morning asking whether a woman named Larson had come through with a boy. He said he was from the bank in Caldwell." The blood in Emma's face moved somewhere else. "He had papers," Ruth said. "I didn't see them, but Dora Reeves at the counter did, and she told me. Something about a debt, a remaining balance on a property note." Emma's voice came out very quiet. "That note was satisfied when I surrendered the property." Apparently they don't agree. Jake was looking at her. She could feel it. She didn't look back. "How much?" she said. "Dora didn't see the figure." Ruth paused. "He's staying at this inn, Emma, room 4. He's asking around about where you've landed." The sitting room was very quiet. Liam, who had been sitting beside Emma with the disciplined boredom of a boy waiting for grown-up conversation to end, looked up at his mother's face and went very still. "Mama?" he said. "It's fine," Emma said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. "It's fine, baby." She looked at Ruth. "His name?" She didn't catch it. Emma nodded. She put both hands flat on her knees and breathed once, the way she breathed when she needed to think and her brain was trying to panic instead. "All right," she said. "One thing at a time." They wrote the statement in Ruth's room, at a small writing desk by the window, while Jake stood by the door and Liam sat on the floor with a book Ruth had produced from somewhere and handed him without comment, as if she was accustomed to managing children around adult business. Emma wrote it the way she'd learned to write things that mattered. Clear, specific, no editorializing, every date and location named, every observable fact separated from inference. She'd written 2 similar documents during the months after Tom died, fighting the bank's accounting. Neither had worked. But she'd gotten better at it. She read it aloud to Ruth when she was done. Ruth listened, then said, Change approximately to between and give the time range. More specific. Emma changed it. Good, Ruth said. She took the pen and signed her name at the bottom, with a decisive stroke of a woman who didn't second-guess herself once she decided. Send it to Commissioner Aldrich in the county seat. He's not a good man, but he's a careful one. He won't ignore documentation with a landowner's name on it. Thank you, Emma said. Don't thank me. Ruth looked at her directly. Just handle the other thing, the man from the bank. Emma folded the document. She stood. She looked at Jake. Room 4, she said. He held the door. She didn't knock. She was not in the mood for the ceremony of knocking. The man from the bank opened his door to find Emma Larson standing in the hallway with a folded document under one arm and an expression that he clearly had not been expecting, because his face went through 3 different things in quick succession before it settled on a careful blankness. He was young, younger than she'd expected, early 30s, soft-handed, with the particular pallor of a man who spent his working life indoors. His name was Garrett, he told her, after she told him to tell her, which he did without much resistance. You have papers for me, she said. He looked past her at Jake. Talk to me, Emma said, not him. Garrett looked back at her. He cleared his throat and went to his bag and produced a folded envelope and held it out. Emma opened it and read it standing in the doorway. The figure at the bottom made her jaw tighten. This is wrong, she said. The bank's accounting is wrong, she looked up. I surrendered the property in full in March. The surrender agreement specified that the property value would satisfy the outstanding balance. I have a signed copy of that agreement. The agreement was for the primary note, Garrett said. He sounded like he was reciting something he'd been told to recite. There was no secondary note. There was one note, one property, one surrender agreement with one signature from your manager, Walter Croft. She looked at him. Is Walter Croft still your manager? A pause. Mr. Croft retired in April. Emma looked at him steadily. How convenient. Garrett shifted his weight. You came out here, Emma said slowly, looking for a widow woman with a child and no fixed address, carrying a paper for a debt that didn't exist 6 months ago. Now that the man who signed the original agreement is retired and unavailable. She tilted her head. Who sent you, Mr. Garrett? Because it wasn't the bank. His face told her she'd hit something solid. I have my orders. From who? From who? She said it very quietly, which was always worse. Garrett closed his mouth. Jake, behind her, hadn't spoken once. He didn't need to. His presence was its own kind of language, and whatever it was saying to Garrett appeared to be effective. I'm going to keep this document, Emma said, and I'm going to write to Walter Croft in his retirement and ask him to confirm the terms of our original agreement. And if this debt has Harding Pell's name anywhere near it. She looked at Garrett until he met her eyes. I will make significantly more trouble for everyone involved than this is worth. Do you understand me? Garrett's throat moved. Yes, he said. Good. She folded the paper back up. Good day, Mr. Garrett. She turned. Jake stepped back to give her room, and they walked down the hallway without speaking, and Emma kept her spine straight all the way to the bottom of the stairs and out the front door of the inn into the hard summer sun. Then she stopped. She pressed one hand to the wall of the inn and let out a slow, shaking breath. Jake stood beside her and didn't say anything. It's Pell, she said. He found out I was there. He figured I was the weak point. I figured that too, Jake said. She looked at him sharply. When? When Caldwell came back yesterday. Caldwell came back? You didn't tell me. I was going to. He met her eyes. He stopped at the fence line while you were inside. Told me Pell was prepared to make things difficult for any parties associated with me. Emma stared at him. I didn't want to worry you until I knew what exactly— Jake! She turned to face him directly. We are in this together, or we are not. You said you trusted me. That means all of it.
He looked at her. Something moved through his face. Something that was not the usual flatness. Something older and less contained. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. She had not expected the apology. It landed somewhere unexpected. Okay, she said. She straightened. All of it, going forward. All of it, he said. They looked at each other for a moment in the full heat of the July midday, in front of an inn in a town that had already decided to have opinions about both of them, and Emma felt the particular vertigo of a life rearranging itself around her, in ways she had not agreed to and could not entirely stop. She also felt, underneath the vertigo, something steadier, something that had not been there 8 months ago, or 4 weeks ago, or even 10 days ago when she'd been sitting in the dust of a road, trying to convince a stranger she was fine. She didn't look at it directly. She just let it be there. We should get Liam, she said. We should, Jake said. They posted the statement at the county office in Millhaven before they left. The one clerk present looked at Ruth's signature, and looked at Emma, and looked at the document, and stamped it received with slightly more seriousness than Emma had expected, which was either a good sign or a sign that the clerk was more afraid of Ruth Aldane than he was of Pell, which was also useful. On the way back, Liam fell asleep against Jake's chest before they were a mile out of town, his small head tipped sideways, completely unconscious in the absolute way of a child who has decided the person holding him is reliable. Jake adjusted his arm without waking him. Emma rode beside them and watched it happen, and looked away before it could mean too much. They were a mile from the cabin when she saw the smoke. Not the thin, straight smoke of a cook fire, the wrong color, the wrong direction. Her stomach dropped. Jake. He'd already seen it. He passed Liam to her, clean, fast, one motion, and drove his heels into Ranger's sides, and the horse went from a walk to a full run in 2 strides, and Emma was left on the mare, holding her son and watching the smoke rise from the direction of the south pasture. Mama? Liam was awake, confused, gripping her arm. Hold on, she said. She pushed the mare forward. By the time she reached the fence line, Jake was already on the ground. The south field was burning. Not the cabin, not the barn, but the grass in the south pasture, the creekside pasture, the one with the water. Someone had set it deliberately. You could see the line of it, too even to be accidental. Jake was at the fence with a wet grain sack, beating at the edge nearest the creek. Emma got Liam off the horse and looked him in the eyes. You stay here, on this side of the fence. You don't move. Mama! Liam. She held his face in both hands. Stay. He stayed. She went to the barn and found 2 more sacks and ran them to the water trough and soaked them through and ran back and went through the fence and started beating alongside Jake, and neither of them said a single word because there was nothing to say that the fire didn't already know. They worked for 40 minutes. When it was done, contained, the line of it broken, the creek side of the field charred, but the water itself untouched, Emma sat down in the dirt on the wrong side of the fence and put her arms on her knees and breathed. Jake stood beside her, blackened to the elbows, looking at what was left. He's escalating, Emma said. Yes. This was a message. He could have taken the water. He didn't. He just wanted you to know he could. Yes.
She looked up at him. His face was hard and tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not defeated, but carrying the weight of a thing that had gone on too long. "Jake," she stood. Her legs were shaking slightly, and she ignored it. "The document we sent today buys us some time, but it's not enough. We need to go further." She looked at him. "Is there anyone at all in this valley, who has had trouble with Pell and is still here? Still standing?" Jake thought. She watched him think. "Charlie Reeves," he said slowly. "Dora's husband. He runs the dry goods. Pell tried to push him out 4 years ago. Something about the building title. Charlie held on." He paused. "And Ben Marsh. He's got the small ranch at the north end of the valley. Pell's offered on his land twice." "Have they talked to each other about it?" Jake looked at her. "Have they ever sat in a room together," Emma said, "and compared what Pell has done to each of them, specifically?" The look on Jake's face told her they hadn't. "Then that's what we do next," she said. "One statement from one landowner is notable. 3 statements from 3 landowners describing the same pattern." She looked at him. "That's a federal case, Jake. That's something a territory newspaper prints. That's something that costs Harding Pell money and reputation at the same time." Jake stood in the burned field and looked at her, and Emma stood in the burned field and looked back. And she was dirty and tired, and her ankle had reopened something it shouldn't have, and her hands smelled like smoke, and she thought, not for the first time, and with increasing force, that the life she'd been walking toward when her ankle buckled on the road had probably not been the right life for her anyway. This felt more like the right life. She was not ready to say that out loud. "Liam!" Jake called, raising his voice toward the fence. "Yeah?" the boy called back immediately. "You hungry?" A pause of approximately half a second. "Yes," Liam said, with great feeling. Jake looked at Emma. "One thing at a time," he said. Her own words returned to her. She looked at him. "One thing at a time," she agreed. They ate supper late that night, later than usual, the meal simpler because they were too tired for anything else. Bread and cold beans and water, and nobody complaining. Liam ate without being told to, and washed his own plate without being asked, and went to the bed without argument. All of which told Emma more precisely than any words could have what the day had cost him. She sat with him for a minute. His hand found hers in the dark. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" he said. She looked at him in the low light, at his face, which was Tom's face around the eyes, and hers everywhere else, and which was currently wearing the expression of a 7-year-old boy trying very hard to be brave. "Yes," she said. "You sure?" She squeezed his hand. "I am the surest I have been in a long time." He looked at her for another moment, measuring it, the way he always measured her words against her face, to check if they matched. They matched. He settled. She waited until his breathing evened out, then went back to the table. Jake was still there. He had a cup in front of him, and he was looking at nothing in particular, and he looked up when she sat down, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the night insects did their work outside, and the lamp burned low. "I wrote to Tom's brother once," Emma said, not knowing she was going to say it. "After Tom died, I told him what had happened. The land, the bank, all of it." She stopped. He wrote back one sentence. He said, "You made your bed." Jake looked at her. "I've thought about that a lot," she said. "Whether he was right. Whether all of it was choices I made and consequences I should have seen." She looked at the table. "I don't think he was right, but I thought about it." "He wasn't right," Jake said. "No." She looked up. "No, he wasn't." but I needed to hear someone else say it. Jake held her gaze. "He wasn't right," he said again. And this time it was slower, more deliberate. The way he said things when he was making sure they landed. Emma sat with that for a moment. "The man who died in the fire," she said. "Daniel Miller. Did he have children?" A pause. "2 girls. Do they still live near here?" "Other side of Millhaven." He looked at her carefully. "Why?" "Because if you've been carrying what happened to that family by yourself for 3 years," she said, "with no one knowing the true story, and if his family doesn't know either, then maybe it's time they did." Jake went very still. "It's not my place to say what you do with that," Emma said quickly. "It's yours. I'm just—" She stopped. "I'm just saying that some weights aren't meant to be carried alone. And you've been alone out here for a long time." The lamp between them flickered. Jake looked at her for a long moment, and Emma looked back, and the weight of every unspoken thing that had accumulated over the past 2 weeks sat in the air between them, like a weather system neither of them was quite ready to walk into. Then Jake's hand moved across the table. Not far, just enough. His fingers rested near hers, not touching, not quite, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. She didn't move away. She didn't move toward it either. But she didn't move away. And outside, somewhere in the dark of the south pasture, the creek ran on as it always had, through the burned grass and the untouched water, and the land that 2 people and 1 small boy were, without entirely meaning to, beginning to defend together. The meeting was Emma's idea, and Jake's reluctance, and Ruth Aldane's dining room. Ruth had offered the space without being asked. She'd heard about the fire in the south pasture the way news traveled in small valleys, which was faster than horses and louder than it needed to be. And she'd sent a boy out to the cabin the next morning with a note that said simply, "Bring Hunter. I'll have coffee and Charlie Reed's here by 9. Emma read it and handed it to Jake. He read it and said, "She moves fast." "Yes," Emma said. "That's why I asked her." Ben Marsh was already at Ruth's table when they arrived. A compact, weathered man in his 50s, with the permanently squinted eyes of someone who had spent decades reading weather from horizon lines. He looked at Jake with the careful neutrality of a man who had heard things and hadn't decided yet what to do with them. He looked at Emma with something closer to curiosity. Charlie Reeves came in 4 minutes later, his wife Dora behind him, which no one had arranged, but no one objected to either. Dora, as it turned out, had more to say than Charlie, and said it faster. And the story that came out of her in the first 10 minutes of sitting down was more detailed and more damning than anything Emma had expected. Pell had pressured the Reeves building title 4 years ago through a county surveying dispute that Charlie had quietly resolved by paying twice what the survey should have cost. Pell had run off 2 small ranchers north of town in the past 3 years. One family Emma didn't know, one family Ben Marsh knew by name and had watched leave. Ben himself had found his fence line redrawn twice. He'd assumed it was a mistake. He'd fixed it himself, both times. Emma sat and listened to all of it, and wrote notes on the back of the paper Ruth had given her. And she thought about how isolation was the thing that made it work. How each person in this room had absorbed their individual pressure in silence because they didn't know the others had absorbed the same. And how Pell had known that, had counted on it, had engineered it. That was the thing about powerful men who operated like this. They didn't beat you openly. They made you feel alone. "He's done this to all of us," Dora Reeves said, and her voice had the particular quality of a woman who has just watched something she suspected become something she knew. "He's been doing it for years, and we've all been sitting here thinking we were the only ones." "Not anymore," Emma said. Everyone at the table looked at her. She laid out what she'd written. 4 accounts, 4 landowners, 4 documented incidents, all describing the same method across the same years. A pattern, not grievance,
Not personal disputes. A pattern which was a different and far more serious thing when it sat on paper under 4 different names. "This goes to Commissioner Aldrich," she said, "and a copy goes to the territorial newspaper in the county seat. Not an accusation, a documented record, public and on file." She looked around the table. "Pell can pressure one person. He cannot pressure a record." Ben Marsh leaned forward. "What's to stop him from coming after us harder once he knows?" "Nothing," Emma said honestly. "But right now, he's coming after you quietly, because quiet is how he wins. Once this is public, it's not quiet anymore. Every move he makes from here forward is visible. And visible is the one thing men like Pell cannot survive." Silence. Then Ruth said, "She's right." Then Dora said, "I'll sign it." Charlie looked at his wife, and then at the table, and then at Jake, who had been sitting at the corner of the group, saying nothing, watching everything. "Hunter," Charlie said, "you trust her?" Jake looked at Emma. Something passed over his face. Not the flatness, not the careful neutrality she'd come to know as his default. Something underneath all of that. Something he'd been keeping below the surface for 2 weeks, and apparently had decided to stop keeping. "More than I've trusted anyone in a long time," he said. Emma looked at the table. Ben Marsh looked at Charlie Reeves. Charlie said, "All right, I'll sign." They sent the documents that afternoon, the combined statement to Commissioner Aldrich by the county office, and a sealed letter with full documentation to the editor of the Territory Clarion in the county seat, which Ruth had sent to before, and which Ruth said would print factual documentation if it was clean and sourced and came from known names. It was clean and sourced and came from known names. The waiting after that was the hard part. Emma had always found waiting harder than acting. Action had shape. It had direction and momentum, and the small, manageable comfort of doing. Waiting was just exposure. You stood in the open with everything you'd built, and you waited to see what came at it. What came first was Caldwell. He rode up to the cabin 3 days after the documents went out, and Emma saw him coming from the window, and she stood up and put her hands flat on the table and made herself breathe. Jake was in the barn. She went to the door. "Morning," she said, before Caldwell could speak. He looked at her with an expression that had moved past the performative friendliness of the first visit into something more unvarnished. "Ma'am, Hunter here?" "I'm here," Jake said from behind her. She hadn't heard him come up. Caldwell's eyes moved between them with a calculation she didn't bother hiding anymore. "You sent documents to the county commissioner." "We did," Emma said. "And to the territory paper." "We did." Caldwell leaned on his pommel. That was unwise. "We disagree," Emma said. "You've made Pell angry." He said it like a warning, like the thing itself was so self-evidently dangerous that the warning required no elaboration. "Deputy," Emma said, and her voice was the quiet voice, the dangerous one. "I want to be very clear about something. My name is on those documents, alongside 4 other landowners in this county. If anything happens to any of us, a fire, a fence, a horse turned out on the road, anything, my very next letter goes to the territorial governor's office and names you specifically as an interested party." She looked at him steadily. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Caldwell stared at her. "She asked if you understood," Jake said. Caldwell's jaw moved. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Emma said.
A man who has made his career standing behind a more powerful man and hoping no one looks directly at him. The problem is, I'm looking directly at you. She held his gaze without flinching. Good day, Deputy. Caldwell held the stare for a long, testing moment. Then he turned his horse and rode. Emma let out a breath that started in her knees and worked upward. Jake stood beside her on the porch and watched the deputy go, and then he said, very quietly, "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched." Emma turned to look at him. "I mean that as a compliment," he said, "and for the first time in 8 months. For the first time since Tom, since the farm, since the accumulated weight of everything that had broken and not been repaired." Emma Larson laughed. Really laughed. The kind that came from somewhere low and real and unguarded. Jake looked at her, and the thing that had been living in his face for 2 weeks, kept flat, kept quiet, managed with the same careful economy he brought to everything, came up to the surface and stayed there. She saw it. She didn't look away. The Territory Clarion ran the story 11 days later. Ruth brought the paper out to the cabin herself, folded under one arm, riding in at mid-morning with the unhurried pace of someone carrying news too good to rush. She set the paper on the table in front of Jake and Emma and Liam and stepped back without saying anything. The story took up half the front page below the fold. The headline read, "Pattern of Land Coercion Alleged Against Pell Operation. 4 Millhaven County landowners file coordinated statement." Liam looked at it. "Is that us?" "That's us," Emma said. "Are we famous?" "We're documented," Emma said, "which is better." He considered this. "Can I hold the paper?" She handed it to him and watched him hold it with both hands, like it was something ceremonial. And she thought that she would keep this day in some interior place that didn't get touched by hard winters or lean years or the ordinary erosions of time. Commissioner Aldrich responded within the week. A formal letter acknowledging receipt of the documentation and advising that an independent review of land management practices in Millhaven County would be initiated. It was careful language, political language, but it was something on record, under official letterhead, which was the thing that couldn't be undone. Pell went quiet. Not immediately. The day after the paper ran, 2 of his riders appeared at the south fence line at dawn, and Jake stood at the porch with his rifle visible and didn't say a word. And after about 10 minutes, the riders left. That was the last direct approach. The offers stopped too. No more negotiations conducted from horseback. No more deputies showing up with observations about how trouble found people who lived alone. He was still there. He still owned the largest operation in the county. He still had more money and more leverage than any of them. And Emma didn't allow herself to mistake quiet for finished. But he had miscalculated. He had moved against multiple people at once because he'd assumed each one was isolated. And he'd been wrong. And men like Pell, in Emma's experience, retreated from miscalculations until they had a better plan. The better plan would come eventually, but eventually was not now. Now was the burned grass in the south pasture growing back already, low and green along the creek edge where the water ran. Now was Liam teaching Ranger to take a carrot from his palm with the patient confidence of a boy who had decided this was his horse in every way that mattered. Now was Ruth Aldane stopping by on Tuesday afternoons, with no particular reason given, and staying for supper without being asked, filling the cabin with the kind of easy, unsentimental conversation that made a space feel inhabited in a way it hadn't before. Now was Emma's ankle, fully healed. She realized it one morning when she walked from the cabin to the barn and back without thinking about it once. She stopped in the yard when she noticed, and stood there for a moment, with the sun on her face, and thought about the road she'd been walking when it buckled. The heat and the dust and the 2 bags that held everything she owned, and the child behind her, who hadn't complained. She thought about how close she'd come to refusing Jake's help. How close she'd come to standing up on that broken ankle and limping 4 miles into Millhaven to a woman who was already 3 weeks in the ground. She found him at the creek that evening. She'd left Liam with the book Ruth had given him, told him she'd be back in 20 minutes, and walked to the south pasture without entirely knowing she was going until she was there. The new grass was soft under her feet. The creek moved the way creeks moved in late summer, quieter than spring, deliberate. Jake was sitting on the bank, not doing anything, just sitting, which she'd come to understand was not emptiness for him, but a kind of active attention, the way some people thought better moving and some people thought better still. She sat down beside him, not close, but beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Emma said, "I went to see the Miller family." Jake turned to look at her. 2 days ago, she said, in Millhaven. I asked Ruth who they were and where to find them. She paused. I hope that's all right. I should have told you first. He was very still. What did you say to them? I told them what you told me. What actually happened that night? She looked at him. I told them a man had been carrying their husband and father's name wrong for 3 years, out of respect for their grief, and I thought they deserved to know the truth. Jake didn't speak. The older girl, Emma said. She's 14. She remembered you. She said... Emma stopped, looked at the water, looked back. She said she knew it wasn't your fault. She said she'd always known. She said nobody ever asked her. Something happened in Jake's face. Not dramatic, the opposite of dramatic. The private interior movement of a thing shifting that had been held too long in one position. He looked at the creek for a long moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. Why did you? Emma thought about it. The real answer, not the easy one. Because you pulled 2 strangers off a road and gave them your bed and slept in your barn, she said. And you've been letting people think the worst of you for 3 years to protect a grieving family. And somewhere in all of that, I think you forgot that you're allowed to put the weight down. She looked at him steadily. You can put it down, Jake. The creek moved between its banks. A long silence. Emma. His voice had a different quality than she'd heard before. Not flat, not managed. I know, she said quietly. I haven't... He stopped, started again. There hasn't been anyone for a long time. And I didn't think... I know, she said again. The month, he said. We said 1 month. The month ended 6 days ago. He looked at her. I didn't say anything, she said, because I didn't know what to say. I still don't entirely know. She pressed her hands together in her lap. I know that Liam drew a picture of this cabin last week and put it on the shelf like it belonged there. I know that I've slept better in the past 3 weeks than in the 8 months before them. I know that when Caldwell came, and when Pell's men came, and when Garrett came with his papers. She stopped. I wasn't afraid. I was angry. And there's a difference between those 2 things that I'd forgotten. Jake was watching her face. I'm not asking you for anything you don't want to give, she said. I want to be clear about that. I can take the half room at Ruth's. I can figure out the next thing. I've been figuring out the next thing for 8 months, and I'm reasonably good at it now. She looked at him. But I don't want to go. And I'm not going to pretend I do. The silence after that had a different quality. Not uncertain. The kind of silence that falls after something important has been said, and both people are just letting it exist. Jake reached over and took her hand. Not the arm, not the functional forearm to forearm of a man helping someone who didn't want to need help.
her hand, his fingers around hers. She looked down at it, then up at him. "Stay," he said. One word, same economy, but with everything underneath it that a man like Jake Hunter didn't use extra words to explain. Emma looked at him for a long moment, at the gray eyes and the jaw that still hadn't decided how it felt about razors, and the face that had been carrying too much alone for too long. And she felt the specific, terrifying, irreversible sensation of a door opening into a life she hadn't known was going to be hers. "Okay," she said. His hand tightened around hers. Just once. Just enough. Liam found them there when he got tired of the book, which took approximately 40 more minutes. He came through the pasture gate with the confidence of a child who had decided this land was his to walk across, stopped when he saw them sitting side by side at the creek, and assessed the situation with the rapid, unsentimental intelligence of a 7-year-old who had been watching adults for clues for 8 months. He looked at his mother's face. He looked at Jake's face. He looked at their hands. "Oh," he said. Emma looked at him. "Come here, baby." He came. He sat down on Emma's other side and looked at the water. "Are we staying?" he said. "Yes," Emma said. A pause. "Good," Liam said. "I told Ranger we were staying. I didn't want to have lied to him." Jake made a sound. Emma was fairly sure it was a laugh, the first real one she'd heard from him, low and unguarded, surprised out of him by a 7-year-old's priorities. She looked at his face, open in the late summer light, and thought that this was something she wanted to keep seeing. She was going to keep seeing it. The three of them sat at the creek until the light went long and gold the way it did in August, when the days were tired of being long and starting to let the evening come a little earlier, a little gentler. Liam talked about Ranger and the creek, and whether there were fish, and whether he could learn to fish, and whether Jake would teach him. Jake said yes to all of it. Emma sat between her son and this man she'd known for 23 days and felt the ground under her, solid and specific and real. Not borrowed, not temporary, not the next thing before the thing after. Just the ground. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Commissioner Aldrich's office. The independent review had turned up irregularities in 3 separate property surveys associated with the Pell operation. The county surveyor was being replaced. A formal inquiry was opened. Ruth brought the letter out herself and read it at the table with everyone present, including Ben Marsh, who had ridden over for no particular reason and stayed for the reading because Ruth had told him to. When she finished, Charlie Reeves, who had come too because apparently Tuesday afternoons at Jake Hunter's cabin had become a thing, said, "He's not done." "No," Emma said. "He's not done." "But he's smaller than he was yesterday," Ruth said. "Yes," Emma said. "He's smaller." She looked at Jake across the table. He looked back at her, and he had the expression she'd come to know as his version of something very close to content. Not demonstrative, not announced, just present and steady and real. Liam was on the floor with the barn cat that had finally decided people were acceptable, scratching it behind the ears with the confident authority of a boy at home in his own house. Emma looked at her son. She looked at the table full of people who had chosen to stand in the same direction. She looked at Jake, who was still looking at her, and who would still be looking at her tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. 8 months ago, she had buried her husband in the churchyard outside Caldwell, and walked away from the only life she'd planned, with 2 bags and a 7-year-old, and nothing past the next step. She had not planned this. She had not seen this. She could not have told you, on that road when her ankle buckled and the dust hit her palms, and her son's voice carried across the summer heat to a stranger on a roan horse. She could not have told you that this was where the road went. But this was where the road went. And Emma Larson, who had been broken and afraid and furious and lost, and had refused, stubbornly and at considerable personal cost, to stay any of those things,
was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was home.